Hello and welcome to the RotD Deep Dive spoiler-filled discussion on Incident in a Ghostland. Now, I mentioned in the review that there was a confusing part for me during a transitionary period, and now that you've seen the movie, you don't mind it being spoiled, whatever. It was the portion where she was snapping back to reality from the fantasy world that she had created for herself. And the home invasion was still ongoing, the threat was still imminent, still very present in that moment. And that was very difficult for me to kind of make that mental switch for. There were a few reasons for that, chief of which was the fact that once we were in the adult Beth setting, I thought that we were locked into that. I really thought this was a situation where the home invasion happened, it was a tale of their childhood, and snap forward to the future, and that's when the movie really presses play and continues on. And when she goes to the house, you know, I thought her mother was dead. The fact that she hadn't aged and so on, I thought that was leading up to it, but I thought it was all kind of, from there, a supernatural element starring adult Beth. And I wasn't really, I really did not expect to be snapped back into the home invasion storyline. So I didn't see it coming at all. I have no problem admitting that. So the transition was a little bit of, what are we doing here? What's actually going on? And I think there were two elements that could have been addressed that would have helped that out. So I'm going to dive into another segment of Here's How I Would Have Done It. So I've talked about this before in different reviews, and it's the concept of binary realities. When you have two different realities that are coexisting right on top of each other within the context of a storyline. Nightmare on Elm Street pulled that off very well between the real world and the dream world. Other movies, not quite so much. And I think one of the big things that you need to really have is a subtle aesthetic between each reality. It can be imperceptible to the conscious mind, but stuff like camera angles, color palettes, background hums, things like that are distinct and unique to each level of the reality that you're creating. And I think that that's really critical. That's very important for that level of confusion to not occur. I can see where they were going. I could see that the twist that they were coming up with, but it becomes, it starts working against itself when I am trying to figure out what's going on so much that I'm actually losing what's happening on the screen in front of my eyeballs. When I'm so invested in trying to wrap my brain around, well, where are we? What's going, what happened? What about her? What about this? Well, didn't she just see this here? But that doesn't make sense within the context. And before I know it, 2-3 minutes have passed and I have missed some dialogue. And that's something that as a filmmaker you want to avoid. So here's what I would have done is I would have done, well, two principal things is I would have made the house a contrasting element, and I would have made the actresses a contrasting element. And first the house. When she got back there as an adult, the mother mentioned, I cleaned up some stuff, I got rid of some stuff and so forth. And, okay, fine. You can kind of see a little bit of that, but there's still a lot of just creepy stuff everywhere. The same wallpaper, the same finishing, the same hanging antlers all over the place. It looked like exactly the same, but with maybe an hour's worth of mopping put to it. So I think that the contrast with the house wasn't strong enough. I think that if the house had been cleaned and the antlers removed and maybe a different coat of paint or a different wallpaper, something that would tell us while we're in the adult Beth storyline that, okay, we're in this place. The houses obviously have a more cheerful tone to it, perhaps. And then once the transition started flipping back, it's like, oh, wait, no, we're actually still back in the old one. It would be much easier to tell. And, at that point, our minds might start racing between, is this actually happening in Beth's head? Is she imagining being back in time or something like that? Is she just reverting back to her old self? Or, I think the transition mentally for me that we are actually going backwards and that the current reality is a false one. Still wouldn't quite have flipped, but it would have taken me much less time to get there. The second thing I would have done is a little bit of difference between the actresses, and it's not that I would have recast it. Honestly, I see where they were going for, and they did a brilliant job of this. I really don't want to complain about the actresses being too similar because obviously one is it's the same character, just with two different actresses and two different periods of time. So the fact that they got two actresses that look so similar is a kudos to them, and I don't want to detract from that. But perhaps if the adult Beth had taken on a shorter bob hairstyle, something like that, I did have trouble telling during that transition flip that we were dealing with two different timeline Beths, that I thought we were still an adult Beth, but the difference between the house was too subtle, the difference between the actresses was too subtle, and that's what made it really difficult for me. If all of a sudden we were now dealing with long-haired Beth as opposed to short bob hair Beth short bob hair Beth that we got to get to know over the last 20-30 minutes or so, as well as the house reverting back, then I think it would have been much easier for that mental switch to flip. But those are kind of that's pretty petty in terms of complaints as far as that goes. It is my chief complaint about this that transition did take me a while to get to, but overall I thought it was brilliant, and what this movie did was just great. The portion where the police first found them and then the police got shot, while I was in that moment, I was kind of rolling my eyes just a little bit, and here's why. I was thinking, okay, now we're getting into a situation where we're going to have overpowered villains that'll never get stopped, and every time the hero or the protagonist, Beth and Vera, think they're safe, they're actually not, and there's no stopping them. Every time there's going to be something that gets them out of the situation and causes the candy truck people to always be one step ahead and one bullet ahead. It's a trope that I find frustrating in some movies. I like the protagonist to be able to think and grit their way through things and be able to actually have success. Whether or not that actually leads to a happy ending, ultimately, I'm really not sold one way or the other. I do like a happy ending, but I also like a more real ending when you're dealing with this kind of situation and have something terrible happen. That's kind of why we like horror movies, is we like watching terrible things happen, and it doesn't always have happy endings. But at the same time, I also like seeing the protagonist flip the script and turn into the antagonist for the villain, and be an active thorn in their side, be an active element against them. And I fear that that's where we weren't going. I fear that is that we were going to be dealing with the overpowered villain trope. And we didn't get that, and I'm glad. And then it started making me think, well, okay, if the candy truck people are just going to wind up getting shot by the police, why didn't it happen in that first scene? Why did we need to draw out that last 10-15 minutes or so to ultimately get to the same place? And I think it was actually a moment of brilliance, looking back on it, because it gave us one of my favorite scenes, and that is when she retreated back into her adult fantasy world. And she was very cognizant of it. You could tell. I mean, she's talking with H.P. Lovecraft with the most terrible prosthetic chin I've ever seen. But regardless, she's talking to H.P. Lovecraft and not really blinking an eye about it. You could tell she understands what this is, and she's all right with it. It almost seems like it was a conscious choice on her part. She's in the truck. She's got the 1,000-yard stare, and then she's back in her fantasy. And then she's presented with a choice. She sees her sister through the glass door there, and she's talking with her mother, who she now knows is dead, and she has this choice. She's talking with her mom, and then she's basically saying, okay, well, I can choose to continue living in this safe place, this place that I've created for myself, and if I choose to walk through that door, then I am dealing with a terrible, abusive, deathy, rapey, terrible situation. But you know what? She's on the other side of that door, and she needs my help. And I thought that it was brilliant the way that they made that visually compelling with that choice in front of her, and the fact that she chose that choice, to walk through that door and help her sister out, and went super feral on it was awesome. I really, really dug everything about how that played out. And then, the whole overpowered villain trope, the cop's there with a gun, and obviously we didn't get the overpowered villain trope. Otherwise, it would have turned into a totally different scene on that one. So I was glad that it ended on a realistic note. I was glad that we had that character development. It was a character arc, really, because in the beginning, when the home invasion first happened, they took Vera, and Beth was staring at the empty void space where Vera was and had a choice to make, and she went up the stairs and tried to escape the house. And I imagine that, haunted her. That choice haunted her. And, she basically got presented with the same choice. You can either escape to safety, even if it's not physical safety, it's mental safety, or you can, face the reality of where you are, the terrible, terrible reality of where you are, and help your sister. And that's what she ended up doing. So I really, really like that. Overall, I was very impressed with this movie, and I really didn't think I would be. I would love to hear from you at this point. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, whatever. I would love to see what you have to say in the comments below. If you like these videos, I encourage you to click subscribe. And otherwise, I really just want to say that I really do appreciate you making me a part of your day. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you tomorrow.